Hello and welcome to the energy portion of McDermott, Will, and Emery's post-election webinar. I am Ed Zelke. I am the global head of the firm's energy project finance practice and a renewable energy lawyer for over the past 30 years. I am also, by full disclosure, on the clean energy transition team for the Biden campaign. Joining me today is my partner, Carl Fleming, in our Washington, D.C. office. Carl has an interesting perspective, having served in both the Obama administration as a energy attorney working with the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and also working more recently with the Secretary of Commerce under the Trump administration on the Committee for Renewable Energy and Efficiency. Our special guest today is Jonathan Silver, one of the nation's leading clean energy economy investors and advisors. He is currently the managing director of Tax Equity Advisors. And prior to that, in maybe a prior life, he led the federal government's $40 billion clean energy investment fund during the Obama administration. He, as one of his many accolades, he's also been named as one of the country's top 10 green tech influencers. Welcome, Jonathan, and Carl, thank you for joining us. Carl, you and I recently published an article about where the renewable energy industry is headed under either a Trump or a Biden administration. We now have some idea of where this election is coming out. What are your thoughts?
Sure. I think, while we're still waiting finalization, we can kind of talk about what we saw and what we did not see in this year's election. We did not see a blue wave election that many had expected. We also did not see a clear repudiation of Trump as president. And we did, however, see a return of a McConnell-controlled Senate. So we're now looking at a Biden as president, Republican-controlled Senate, and a Democratic House, albeit a smaller Democratic one than we expected. That the renewables industry's hopes for the Joe Biden plan, implementing his $1.7 trillion clean energy plan, kind of unfettered and unrestricted, may have been diminished. But it's still a major win for renewables. It's still a chance to level the playing field and open the doors for a lot that can still be done. But a lot of this will be determined by how or which McConnell we see when Biden takes over. We've seen a McConnell who's a great facilitator. He hosts kind of meals for both sides of the aisle and gets things done. We've also seen a McConnell who can be a great Stonewall artist and reject anything Democratic coming through. So only time will tell. I think, we had a few questions for Jonathan, and Jonathan, generally speaking, what does the likely landscape mean for the Biden team going forward? In particular, what would your recommendations be to Joe Biden on how to make this new dynamic work for the renewables industry and his plan, and kind of what special considerations are in play here as he has to navigate this playing field from now until at least 2022 and possibly his entire first term?
Well, Carl, and thanks for having me. It's delighted to be able to join you. And Carl, that's not one question; that's 11 questions. But I'll
many subparts.
Let me try to step back a bit and add to what I thought was a very accurate assessment on your part of what has just happened. Maybe provide a little more color in order to answer the question that you've posed to me. Obviously, there's no known outcome yet, but it's certainly clear that Vice President Biden still has more paths to victory than President Trump does. But there's some other things that came out of this, again, in terms of the landscape. Americans really are truly divided. It's not just that the presidential races are close, it's that every state race was close, every Senate race was close, every congressional race was close. And given the fact that so many Americans voted, you'd have to say that it's a reasonably accurate reflection, therefore, of the fact that the country is quite divided. And I think that division will play a role in what a President Biden could do during the first couple of years of a Biden administration. President Trump did well during the election. Tens of millions of people support his vision for the country, irrespective of what they may think of him personally. But some of his policies have garnered very significant support in a wide swath of America. The vice president did well. He increased Democratic votes in Texas and Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina. He took back Wisconsin and Arizona. So there's a lot to be said for what has happened for both parties. And I just want to add a personal note. A lot of us collectively on both sides of the aisle were concerned about what might happen in this country as a result of this election. And yet there was no violence. There were very, very few and scattered problems around the country. And I think that speaks to the depth of the democratic ideal in the United States. I think that's all very important. You're right. You're completely right. I agree with you. Not only did the green wave fail to materialize, but I'd go further and say that climate change wasn't even really a significant issue in this campaign. Now, some of that is a function, of course, of the fact that we are living through the teeth of the pandemic, which has everybody's attention, and by extension, therefore, of course, through real economic turmoil. But climate change was not a top issue in the election, although it was an important part of the vice president's platform and a major part of what he spoke to, on the campaign trail. A bit ironic that officially the United States withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement while the election was taking place on Wednesday, which was a little odd. But there are a few bright spots, I think, at the state and local level that we can point to. I don't intend this to be a political statement, but John Hickenlooper and Mark Kelly defeating Senate incumbents in their states changed the dynamic in the Senate for interest in and support for a broad range of climate initiatives. In Arizona, Democrats won 2 out of 3 seats on the state utility regulator. Nevada had an issue on the ballot, and Nevadans voted yes on requiring state utilities to get 50% of their electricity from renewables by 2030. Denver increased local sales tax to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. On the other hand, there were some pretty significant losses. Proposition 15 in California, which was an effort to get the owners of commercial and industrial policies to pay taxes based on current market value rather than initial price, and to use those funds in climate-related fashions, did not pass. And the oil production tax in Alaska didn't pass as well. So that was the first part of your question, and yet I'd have to ask you to repeat the second part. Let me take a running start at that.
I can throw them back out to maybe you and Ed. I think it would be, I guess, practically speaking, what would the recommendations be to Joe Biden to make the dynamic work, given the playing field you just mentioned? And I think, as he has to work from now through 2022 and maybe beyond, what kind of just maybe general advice on how to implement this dynamic. It kind of brings us back to the later stages of the Obama administration, where you kind of had Republicans controlling the Senate, and just kind of there's a way to try and get things done with what you have, and maybe just general kind of advice. Ed, maybe you may have some insight as to what you can do in this dynamic where we sit right today.
Well, and again, I'd be curious to hear Jonathan's thoughts. Yeah, I do worry that, if you have 4 years of a Biden administration, you may end up wasting the first 2 years. And you kind of have a choice, I think, if you are someone stepping into that office with a split Congress. Either you can try to figure out how to work with them, or you can try to embarrass them for 2 years, hoping that you can get your team to take the field in 2 years in the midterm elections. I'm not probably a big fan of the second approach. I would like to see the president and the people that he selects try to figure out a way to reach out to the Republicans, whether Senator Murkowski or Senator Grassley or others who have shown an interest in climate issues, to try to find some common ground. But I don't know whether that's the approach that will work in today's Washington. Jonathan, what do you think?
I think you're largely right, Ed. I guess I'd make a couple of general observations. I think that a scenario in which there's a Biden administration and a Republican majority in the Senate means, by and large, that sweeping climate change legislation is unlikely. But that doesn't actually mean that progress isn't possible. A number of the environmental issues, the environmental matters that came up during the Trump administration were effectuated by executive action, by an executive order. And of course, it's possible to reverse an executive order with another executive order. So right off the bat, there are things that President-elect Biden can do to reverse some of the more egregious attacks on environmentalism. Having said that, though, it's probably true that he will have to use agency rulemaking rather than legislation to get some of the bigger pieces of his agenda through. For those of you who may be a little less familiar with this, you can either make a law, you make a rule through legislation, passing a bill to say something, or you can ask an agency to interpret a piece of legislation in a rulemaking. And I think he's likely to look to the agencies to take a leading role in some of the areas that it may not be possible to get legislation through. Frankly, it probably makes it easier for a President Biden to put moderates into some of those climate positions. I think the Democratic Party is likely to to undergo its own inner turmoil between the progressive wing in the party and the more centrist wing of the party around energy and environmental issues. This may, in a sense, give him some cover. The president-elect, if that is what he is, Biden, obviously favors things like fracking, which a certain part of the progressive wing of the party don't. So you may see some changes there. But I think that the entire tone of the conversation will change, which is almost as important in beginning this process of getting legislation through, climate legislation through, as any other.
Carl, let me ask you a question. Do you think that especially with the split House and Senate, that we're going to see much activity on climate as part of maybe a bill to get us out of COVID? Because I have to believe that now that the election is over, we are going to see some action on a stimulus package. Do you think that might be?
I think that's a great question, and I'd love to hear Jonathan's thoughts and yours as well. I think my 2 cents would be, Biden's walking into a depression, a pandemic, and essentially a mandate from our country to solve this stuff, all kind of do something big. So he probably has to come in, try to assert his new power to the extent he can quickly to kind of get us out of this COVID pandemic. He's been pretty public about the need to address that first. So I would presume, or you would hope for, and I think there was some, there's been some chatter about whether there be a COVID stimulus bill, and how you handicap that as to whether you'd see some sort of a renewables portion in part of that COVID bill, since it's been omitted from prior stimulus bills. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts and Jonathan's. My thought would be it'd be great to get it in there. I don't know the likelihood, but you guys may have a better answer than I.
Well, the only reason I'll throw this over to Jonathan that I thought maybe was that the green platform, if you would, or the jobs part of renewable energy was something that really helped lead the ERRA that came out of the early days of the Obama administration, and Joe Biden was a part of that, so he certainly saw that. Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, I think it's very likely now that there will be some kind of stimulus package. Already the Trump administration was moving towards the number that Speaker Pelosi had planted as a sort of a flag in the ground. I have to be honest and say, if the president loses, I don't know how much interest he will have in concluding a package like that because it won't pay dividends, no pun intended, for him politically. But the need is so great in the country that you'd assume that that Congress would come together around that generally. The package that Speaker Pelosi has wants to see does include elements of a Green New Deal, but not all of them, and in fact, not a lot of them. There's a focus on some tax credits and other kinds of incentives. But my guess is that this will not be a one bill fits all program, which includes significant renewables financials as well. I think that's probably going to come later. And it's going to be a little tricky as a result. I certainly agree with Carl. The first bill out has got to be, or the first program out has got to deal with COVID. A second and third bill with the economy and the underlying issues. I would be surprised if the third bill weren't some kind of voting reform bill, however, election reform, given all the issues that have cropped up in the last number of years. And then maybe we get to a climate bill. So the question then is, what can a Biden administration get through in a bill like that? Biden issued a very comprehensive, very robust green energy plan during the campaign. A good portion of it reflects input from Governor Jay Inslee, Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders, and others. And some of that can't get through in where we are likely to end up, but some can. I would expect you'd see that the president would be able to, in some fashion, to be able to protect California's electric vehicle mandate. I think there's pretty broad consensus now around getting environmental risk issues on financial statements. There certainly are support on both sides of the aisle for incentives for commercial retrofits. And then it starts to get a little more wobbly from there, and we can talk about some of those. But the short answer to the question is, I think you will see some items in a stimulus bill, but not as many as people would like to see.
How about the use of the executive order, though, Jonathan? I mean, it's clearly we saw, as we've seen over the past several presidencies, we saw the use of the executive order during the Trump administration. We talked about, Banyan having a whiteboard where they were going to pass executive orders to cross out everything that the Obama administration had done. Is Biden going to have a whiteboard on the environment? Is that, there's been over 100 rollbacks of environmental regulations. It's not that, it does relate to renewables, because everything that makes fossil fuels cheaper, whether it allows it to pollute without having any financial consequence, makes renewables less competitive. And so, and one of the things Carl and I point out in our article is that certainly there are direct things that can help renewables, extension of the ITC or national energy plan that includes a purchase mandate. But there are equally as many things that can happen that can allow renewable to compete more effectively by making or requiring fossil fuels pay a greater share of the costs of any pollution they might cause. Do you see, again, going back, do you see a whiteboard for the Biden administration? Do you think there's going to be pressure to do that?
Well, there'll certainly be pressure to do that. And a lot of it is likely to come from the Democratic Party itself. But as to what will actually be something that he will be able to accomplish over the first 18 to 24 months, I think the jury's a little bit out on that. I think there are elements of the program that will get through. I don't know necessarily that they focus extensivly on renewable power so much as they focus more broadly on the issue of clean. I think Vice President Biden called for 500,000 charging stations, EV charging stations around the country. That's likely to be successful because 250,000 of those are supposed to be in California anyhow. So, and California has committed to 250,000, independent of the Biden plan. ARPA-E, which is a very has strong bipartisan support, even though the president didn't support it and tried to zero it out, has strong bipartisan support in Congress. So probably suggests that there will be equally strong support for what they're calling ARPA-C, which is an early effort to provide grants for important new technologies that address climate change. I think you could expect to see something like that as well. I think the tax incentives around renewables are likely to be increased, but whether or not we actually see a radical reduction in the supports and incentives for the fossil fuel industry, I'm not certain of that just yet.
What about the Paris Climate Accord? Opportunity to rejoin it? Can he do this now that we're out? Can he get us back in without an act of Congress?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, Vice President Biden has committed himself and his administration to rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement. I don't think there's any, dispute about that. I think it's something he would do early and quickly if he can. As to how that happens, I'll leave it to the experts to figure out. But he certainly is committed to doing that.
Carl, one of the things I mentioned in the intro was that you work with the Millennium Challenge Corporation in the Obama administration, which means you were working with the State Department in helping emerging countries in the kind of the emerging growth sector to energize through new technologies. How important is it that we have someone in the White House that's going to try to show some leadership in the climate area?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's important to the extent Joe Biden is able to get into the White House, to have a reestablishment of the U.S. as a leader in renewable energy and climate change. I think we had that position going into the prior administration. I think the past 4 years have led to a little bit of clearly a lack of focus on kind of other countries and maybe the Paris Accord and kind of as a global leader, kind of putting America first. I think to have an administration that comes in and kind of can reset the tone, can set clean energy and renewable energy first and foremost, not only for domestic jobs and kind of taking care of things at home first due to the COVID crisis in the economy. I think to also hold us out as the leader that we are in the renewables industry once again would kind of instill a lot more faith in all of our partners and our friends around the globe to kind of keep pushing forward to put an end to climate change in that regard. So I think it's a critical move to have the Biden administration take place and to see what exactly they can do while they're in the administration. But I think all eyes are looking towards us as to how we address this problem.
Jonathan, I do worry about Carl's comment on the McConnell wall in the Senate. We don't know what we're going to get, and we don't know how this election is going to play, and whether some of the senators who moved away from Donald Trump, whether they're going to move away from Mitch McConnell, or they're going to reinforce the wall, if you would, for a Biden administration. We talked a little bit about the executive orders and the whiteboard and little things he might be able to do. Is that much broader than I think most people think? I mean, you talk about FERC. Can we reappoint FERC commissioners who are going to make it incredibly easy for renewables, even if you can't get the tax incentives extended, or you can't get a national energy purchase mandate? I mean, I don't know whether it's 10% or 30% or 60% of the actions can be taken without Congress. What's your thought on that?
Well, that's a great question. I guess my thought on that is that if you step back a bit and look at what McConnell and the Republican Senate was trying to do, that most of the obstruction came around judges and the judicial system, not quite as much around other appointments. I don't expect that in a essentially a 50-50 Senate. No one knows exactly yet, but certainly a balanced Senate. I would be surprised if there was really a lot of pushback on a President Biden trying to get people he wanted into various government positions. I wouldn't expect you to see them trying to hold open positions like FERC commissioners, et cetera, et cetera. I think to the extent they can continue to slow down and make life difficult for filling judicial appointments, they probably will. But I don't think that there will be issues around who's at EPA and at FERC and things like that. I think that Vice President Biden's experience on the Hill and relationships on the Hill will stand him in good stead in terms of getting most appointments through. And I believe that most of the Republican senators believe that the advise and consent function is really not intended to stop a president from building out his or her own cabinet and agencies properly.
How about judges? We now have had 6 years since the Obama administration wasn't allowed to have federal justices or justices confirmed for the last 2 years. So we've had 6 years of a strong desire to appoint conservative judges. How do you think that might impact the energy industry generally, whether it's oil and gas or electricity or renewables? Is this going
I can offer up some thoughts, but since both of you are lawyers and I'm not, I'd love to hear what you all think about that.
Well, I'll turn it to Carl then. Carl, do you have any concern about this?
I do have concern. I want to say, how founded it may be, it's uncertain at this time. I think with the recent appointment to the Supreme Court, there is at least at the theoretical law school level, a question as to whether certain of the appeals of clean energy friendly laws could be brought to the Supreme Court and have climate change questioned at that level. I think while it's kind of a bit theoretical, it could be practical as things play out. And having the new kind of lineup in the Supreme Court, it could cause for interesting conversation. I don't think it's a certainty, and I don't think it's going to jeopardize, the clean energy agenda in the U.S. like it may have if there was a Trump, if Trump were to stay in the administration. So I'm more confident that we should be comfortable. But that's just my 2 cents on the topic. I'd see what you guys have to say on that.
Well, I guess my concern is that I expect that a lot of the anti-regulation, some would say anti-environment changes that were made during the Trump administration will be reversed by a Biden administration, to the extent that we relaxed rules on coal plants because the administration didn't believe in climate change, and under the Clean Air Act, the Biden administration may reimpose those, and then they'll get sued by the opposite of the folks that were suing the Trump administration, and they'll go to court and they will find possibly friendlier judges than they might have found if we had a more balanced judiciary. And so there is some concern about that.
I'll leave you then with this happy note, Ed, or happier note, or potentially happy note. While I can't speak to what the judges will or won't do, it's important to remember, I think, that in the next off-year election, 2 years from now, a third of the U.S. Senate is up. And if you look at those seats, 2/3 of those are held by Republicans. So the Republican Party is going to have to go through another vetting process around here. And to the extent that environmental issues and climate issues continue to grow in importance, they'll play a more active role in the off-year elections as well. And who knows where we'll be after that.
Good point. I see we are almost out of time. Jonathan Silver, as always, my friend, good to see you, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
My partner, thank you for joining us as well. And with that, we'll say goodbye and wish everyone a good day.